So yeah, welcome Anna to your music industry podcast. Thanks for sitting down with me today at the Electronic Sound Summit.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem at all. It's interesting as you are the first artist manager on the podcast.
Really?
Yeah, over 50 episodes and you're the first, which I didn't realise until preparing for this podcast.
I can't believe it. I feel honoured.
Well, I think to dive straight into it, I'd love to first off start by gaining some perspective on your journey as to just kind of read your bio, everything from being a vocal talent scout for X Factor, for Britain's Got Talent, to Groove Armada, working on their management team, to now building your own platform for helping the emerging talent.
Yes, yeah.
What was that journey like from finishing your degree with a first to then jumping into the industry?
So I consider myself an artist manager and always have been. So I probably am quite unusual for most managers in that lots of managers come to management through working at a label first or working in music PR. I actually left university and my first job was artist management and has been ever since. I always knew from quite a young age I wanted to be an artist manager, actually. So I started, even before I knew anything about it, I managed kind of local bands in my hometown, and then went and did a music degree, which you did have to have an instrument for. So I sang and studied various different parts of the music business through that as well. But whilst I was at university, as I say, I was managing local bands, I was reviewing local shows, and I tried to kind of get out and network, and I came to kind of music conferences and went and did a lot of sort of hustling and trying to meet people. And it's actually through that I got my very first artist management job, which happened pretty much, very, very quickly once I'd finished my degree. And that was with Groove Armada's management team. So that was very fortunate, but I really was thrown in at kind of the deep end of artist management because they were sort of at the peak of their career at the time. And I literally had my interview with their sort of current manager at the time. Had my interview on a Tuesday, and he kind of was like, okay, when can you start? And at the time I was like, when do you need me? And
right now.
Yeah, and he was literally like, the next UK tour starts on Monday morning, so it'd be good if you were here in time for that. So I came down to London literally with one suitcase, nowhere to live, had found a sort of friend of a friend of a friend that would let me sleep on their couch, came down with one suitcase on the Sunday night, and the job was initially for kind of just 3 months, almost like a sort of paid internship. And so I came down just kind of like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is my foot in. Came down on a Sunday night, started work in the office on the Monday morning, and by the Thursday, I was back up in Scotland, where I'd originally come from, for the date that they were playing on the UK tour, which was at Glasgow Barrowland. So I really properly was kind of thrown right in, and it was a very steep learning curve. And I just haven't stopped since. I've been an artist manager ever since. So that 3-month internship turned into a permanent job. I stayed with them almost 4 years, and then I left to set up my artist management company, which I'm still running today. So it's been a really interesting journey so far.
And do you think, getting that job opportunity and getting the job, do you think in the interview where you showed your work ethic of not only knowing about music in a musical way through singing, but also reviewing, managing bands, do you think that really helped you to get that position? I
think my degree had almost nothing to do with kind of what I've gone on to do since, and I think it had everything to do with what I was making of my time at university by trying to get out and learn practically. I don't think there's any substitute in music, but in particular in artist management, for actually just getting out and trying it, meeting people, learning, picking people's brains, and really showing that you're sort of willing to kind of get out there and work and apply yourself. And what was incredible about Groove Armada, and I respect them so much and feel very grateful to have worked with them, because when I kind of started, they knew that I was very green, but I think they could also see how ambitious I was, but also how much I was willing to do the work. Kind of whatever was asked of me, I just sort of threw myself into it. And I think they spotted that and really were just kind of like, okay, you're very ambitious. You seem to like to do the work. If you want responsibility, here's some more of it. And it was just kind of sink or swim. And I'm sure I dropped the ball sometimes. I didn't always get it right. But anything that I didn't quite get right, you learn from instantly and you just move forward. And the thing about artist management, especially at that level, is that it's so fast paced that what might seem like a disaster at 11 a.m. where you think, oh my goodness, I've done something incorrectly, by 3 p.m. you're onto a whole new disaster, it's somewhere else, because it's a lot of firefighting. So I think that was kind of really honestly the most fortunate sort of learning curve, and I had very, very understanding artists essentially. So yeah, really, really incredible.
And out of curiosity, did you like Groove Armada's music?
Do you know, before I started with, I loved music and was very aware of their work, but no more so than kind of all the other artists that I also liked and enjoyed. I wasn't necessarily the biggest electronic music fan, but what I did really love with all types of music, and this is still true today, I love a very sort of impressive, dynamic live show. And they have always had that and still have it now. And kind of starting literally the job and going on tour that exact same week. And, I met them for the very first time at a big live show of theirs, to kind of witness the show before I actually even really properly even spoke to them, and just was like, okay, so this is what it is. This is the entity. These are the people involved. That was kind of what brought me in more than anything else. As it happens, they're excellent producers and songwriters and very nice people to work with, but really it wasn't necessarily that I was like, yeah, that's specifically who I want to work with. But again, there couldn't be a better learning opportunity, because what they did was so multifaceted. They had this incredible live show, and they'd make these incredible studio albums, but they're also fantastic DJs and producers, and they've done a lot of stuff, that's slightly more underground in the dance music scene. So really I was learning about all of those different things and touring around kind of, arenas or sort of large venues. And so you get you really get a bit of everything. At the same time, they also owned and ran Lovebox Festival in London at the time. And so I would also work across that as well. So there was just, it really, really could not have been more lucky in terms of a learning experience.
In terms of that, did you have much social life? Because
No.
going from student life, which can be very social, to now having a 9 to 5, so to call it, despite it probably working on the weekends too.
Yeah, for sure. And traveling a lot, and, gigs and weekends and festivals and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I didn't have much social life. I still don't as an artist manager, but there's also a huge, blend between professional and personal when you work in music, especially as a manager, because a lot of my time is spent at gigs and at shows and at festivals and backstage, and you're meeting and speaking with lots of colleagues and associates, but there's also lots of people that become friends and that you keep seeing at those same events. So it was really, really both, and I was very fortunate in the sense that their band and crew were really like a big kind of family. And were lovely, lovely, great people to work with. And in fact, I will say I was quite spoilt, because that was the first artist and sort of band and crowd worked with, and they couldn't have been better people to work with. And I think I had hoped and assumed that that's how the whole industry was, and it's not necessarily. So yeah, I think one of the reasons I actually left in the end was I did feel like, there's a real lack of separation between my sort of professional life and then social life, and I just knew that wasn't going to be sustainable long term. I would say that now with the artists I manage, there's much more of a separation, which is something that you just learn from experience, and you put in sort of firmer boundaries and make sure that you have time that your artists don't necessarily know about and have access to you all the time.
Yeah. Okay. So later on in the podcast, I'd actually love to talk about how artists can kind of set themselves up for success, becoming more desirable, and how they can find the manager. But I think for the next couple of questions, it'd be nice to talk about actually your experience in that point, and going from working for Groove Armada as part of their management agency to starting your own kind of management team, to then starting your own platform.
Yes.
What were the motivations behind that?
I have always been a self-starter, and again, as part of my university degree, I really specialised in, I guess, what you'd call entrepreneurship, and they had a business centre at my university. So I actually started a kind of mock artist management company whilst I was still a student. And so I had a business plan for it, long before I was actually a practicing manager. And I guess the desire to work for myself never left me. And as I said before, I was very ambitious, and once I'd gained all of that experience from working with them, we managed a roster of other artists at the same time. So I had 4 years of really solid management experience. And when I left, I was kind of approached about, going into other management companies. And I genuinely just felt like it's not going to be a better or more enjoyable or more formative experience than I have just had with the company I've been with and the team I've been with. So I don't feel like there's anything I'm going to necessarily gain or learn extra from that. So I think it was premature to set up my own artist management company, but at the time the alternatives didn't feel like they were the right option either. And so I left specifically with the idea to manage artists on my own, just as a kind of independent manager, and see how that went, which was a huge risk. Again, another great learning experience. The company has obviously evolved hugely since then, and I do still manage artists day to day, but there's other parts to my business now, which is I do a lot of consultancy work. I consult for music artists specifically, but also for small music businesses. And I have built a platform, which is something that's happened over the last couple of years. And that platform is a membership site for independent artists, whether they're just starting out or they're actually more experienced and at the end of their careers, where artists often also feel they don't necessarily want or need a full-time manager, but they do want a little bit more support and guidance. So the platform is called The Virtual Manager, and it really was to essentially fill in that gap for artists, mostly from where they're kind of starting out as an artist, anywhere on the spectrum up to when they think they'd be ready to take on a manager. And that time is much longer than artists think. They think, you kind of get some good checks together, you go and get a manager, and then that's it. And actually the things that make you attractive to an artist manager or how far you need to be in your career is getting later and later all the time, because the industry has just changed. And I think artists are much more empowered now, which is amazing. So I felt like there was this whole section of artists, the people that need the most support, that don't have it and can't get it, other than kind of maybe reading a book or something. And for me, when I think about, maybe I'm too young to be thinking about this, but when I think about kind of the legacy I want to leave behind in the industry, it's that I want to have encouraged and supported as many music artists, and in particular the people that need the most support, i.e. those that are independent, as possible. So for me, this is really kind of, what I want to leave behind. And that really has come from people that in my life or my music career that, I'm only in the job I'm in now because they've really encouraged me, or they taught me a bit, or they really made me think, I could do it. So I kind of want to be that person for artists. And also, I think lots of artists, they think they have less power and less access to the things that they want to achieve than they actually do. They just don't necessarily know how to do it. And I was just like, I can do this, I can give them it and I can teach them. So that's where the idea for the platform came from. And it's actually by far and away the most rewarding thing I've done, because it allows me to help, thousands of artists at once, not just 3 or 4 that are on my roster. At the same time, I'm still a day-to-day artist manager for a couple of artists, because it's incredibly important to me that I am fully up to date with the industry and still practicing as a manager. I don't ever I'm not a teacher, an educator. I'm not one of those people that ever thinks like you should necessarily be educating unless you are still very up to date and practicing in the industry.
On the ground.
And I still really enjoy, being on the ground, but I didn't want to do that, 24/7 essentially. So there's lots of different parts of my business, and I'm really happy now with the business model that I've got. But it started much more as a traditional arts management company.
And I find what you said really interesting, as I've had that experience myself going to uni. The world of the music industry is kind of really unknown to independent artists. There's degrees, there's some degrees on like the music business, but most people go in to learn how to make music. And in that degree, 99% of the course is how to make music. But where's the resource in what to do once you've finished that music, what to do with it, how to build the connections? And I totally find that.
And the steps are different for every artist. I don't want to say like, there's one way or there's one roadmap, because there definitely isn't. But there's not a roadmap, but there are definitely certain things that are the basis of a successful, sort of sustainable music career. But what I remember about being a music student myself and wanting to get into the industry, not even as an artist, was that we would have music industry personnel come in and give talks and stuff. And I felt like nothing was actually ever given away. And I understand that that's because some of it isn't tangible. It can only be general in its advice. But I really wanted to be the opposite of that. I just thought remember thinking, you know, if I ever get to the point where I've got good experience and knowledge to share, I want to give it away freely, because you know, there's nothing to lose by us doing that. So that was a big frustration of mine, and I just promised myself I would never be that person that kind of came in to give a talk and then sort of spoke in extremely vague, broad terms. I will say that I think the industry's changed a lot since then, and there is more information out there now than there was, you know, perhaps when I was a student, but still not enough for my liking. And, you know, actually we're here at the British Music Experience, and I gave a talk earlier about, you know, for artists, literally like, you know, there's not a roadmap, but these are the steps that I would advise following if you're an emerging artist. And so many people came and said to me, oh, nobody's ever just given me like all the steps. And I'm like, well, I don't see why not, because, you know, what else am I doing here if not that? So,
So out of curiosity, I didn't have the opportunity to experience the talk, but what were some of the fundamental steps in that progress? Yeah,
well, I can probably give you them now, actually, in as quick as time as possible. First of all, I think it's really important to have the foundations of, again, what I think is a successful artist project in place. So those are, you know, a strong vision of what you want the project to be and what you want to achieve. It's having really solid sound identity. So do you have a signature sound? Do you have a particular style? Is that threaded through 5 or 6 at least finished tracks or songs that you're really proud of? Do you know what your identity as an artist is? And that's simply who you are, what your values are, what you stand for, etc. Do you have branding that accurately represents that identity? So making sure that it's all aligned with kind of the vision and what your actual identity as an artist is, so that it's authentic to you. Then once you feel like they're firmly in place, it's about fan base building, because people have this idea of, you know, record labels, artist managers, publishers, whoever it might be that you hope to work with or partner with, that they sign just simply music. And it's not. It's kind of what I would call music plus proof of concept. And that proof of concept is that you have potential in the industry. The only thing that shows you have potential in the industry is a kind of tangible interest in what you're doing. And the only way for artists to illustrate that is by saying, here's my fan base, you know, here's my 1,000 mailing list subscribers, or here's my 10,000 Spotify followers, or whatever it might be. So I think lots of artists think they create music, they hand it over to somebody like myself, and then we go out and do whatever we're going to do with it. And actually what I think is an artist should be building their career and building their fan base and moving forward with the music they want to make. As you progress in your music career, people like an artist manager and other significant team members will come in place to amplify that and elevate it. But you don't want to just kind of assume that they're going to take full responsibility and push it, because that's a really disempowering place to work from, and it leaves you on the back foot as an artist. As it happens, it's just also not how it works, because as an artist manager, no matter how much I love somebody's music, if I haven't seen that there's, as I say, that proof of concept there, or that they have the willing and the work ethic as an artist to go out and be building that fan base and be playing the gigs and, you know, engaging with people, for me, there's nothing to say that it's worth working with. You know, I think musical talent or good songs are literally just the cost of entry to this industry. If you're an artist that's speaking to me, I'm going to assume you're talented. I don't need to question that as such. But do you have all these other traits, and are you willing to actually go out there and build a fan base and build a following for yourself?
And it is really interesting, and I think we're at an interesting point, because I've found some, let's say, coaches, educators are telling people to now focus on the marketing more than the music. And it's always fundamental, like you need great music, but it is important to have your fan base, because either way, publishers, record labels, they're all companies, and they need to make money as much as you do. So they're not going to invest in a product that's going to have a negative impact on them, are they? Yeah,
and I think, you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing music for the love of it. Absolutely. But if you've decided that you want to make a full-time living from your music, you have to understand that anyone else that's working with you is also aiming to make a living from the project. And if you understand that, it becomes much clearer what you need to have in place for to be attractive to the industry and for people to want to work with you. I do think that good music, a good product is the absolute core of any successful artist project. But there's so much more on top of that. And when you talk about marketing, I think that really is the same thing as fan base building, essentially, because it's marketing and promotion that builds that fan base. I also think it's then useful. So the kind of third step in this, roadmap, if you like, I also think it's really important to have some targets as to how you want to grow that fan base or grow engagement or grow your profit or grow your, your income from music. I think it's really important to kind of set some targets and measure your progress, because again, lots of artists are kind of just finding their way forward, which is great. They're making progress, but they're kind of moving. And then it's only after like 12 months of chatting, they're like, none of my marketing and promotion is working. Like nothing seems to be moving forward. And it's a real shame that they've noticed that in kind of year 2 or month 12 instead of like month 3, because they haven't really been measuring their progress. So I do think it's quite important, because that immediately gives you data as to whether or not you're moving in the right direction, you're growing at the right rate, you're doing the right things. If absolutely nothing has moved and you feel like you've been heavily building a fan base or heavily marketing for 12 months, some things disconnected. Yeah. But lots of people don't kind of stop to measure that. So then they're just kind of moving and moving and moving, and they come back to me and they're like, nothing's happened. And I'm like, well, what have you been doing? And I'll explain to them, and I'm like, and where did you start? And they don't really know, if you know what I mean. So yeah, get your foundations firmly in place, build a fan base from as early on as you can, and then literally measure your progress, because those things will tell you immediately if you're not going in the right direction.
Well, thanks a lot for sharing that, because that is some straight actionable advice, which I love to be on the podcast, because that's what some people need. As we were saying, this industry can be unknown. So while it is a framework, not everyone's going to follow the path to the exact route, and that's the amazing thing. Essentially, while music is a business, it is art, and it's finding that balance between them both, isn't it? I
think it's just being really true to who you want to be. And I tend to believe that all artists, regardless of kind of their level of success or not, I like to believe that all artists are making the music they want to make, or if they have sold out. I mean, I don't even really know what that means, but you say it all the time as if it's a criticism. If they have sold out, let's say, quite often that's because they've decided that for them, they want to make a really, really, really good living, and they've worked out a formula that allows them to do that. If that is true to who they are, and they're still, doing things that they're excited about and they're enjoying it, and it's not just completely cynical, then they're still being true to who they are, if you know what I mean. I'm happy with that. As you say, the route won't be the same for everybody, and the strategy won't be the same for everybody, but the formula and kind of the core of what makes it successful are the same. They really are, regardless of how underground or how commercial you might want to be. Yeah,
it's like principles versus methods, and they are the principles.
Yep, absolutely right, yeah.
So I think it'd be worth diving into management, in the sense of an artist, they'll at one point probably want or need a manager. One, how can they find a manager? And two, are there any kind of red flags when a manager approaches you, or is there anything to kind of watch out for in case you can see someone's got bad intentions, or what does a good relationship look like?
Yeah, well, you've used the right word, which is that it is absolutely a relationship, and it's a very close working relationship. I think some people don't realize quite how close. But if you think about, if you're an artist and you think about the vision and where it is you want to get to in your career, if you imagine what that looks like, imagine you're then going to have your manager with you by your side at all times. Is it somebody that you're going to be able to work really well with and have a positive kind of healthy working relationship with? Those are really important things to be thinking about. If people are to sort of follow the principles that we've just talked about, there's a really good chance that managers will be approaching you because they'll be hearing about what you're doing. They will see the buzz building around your project. They will see your fan base growing over time. So they might have seen you really early on and loved your music, but been like, this is too early. It doesn't have that proof of concept in place, and been kind of then paying attention to your progress. They will see when you're kind of reaching that sort of greater tipping point, and they might be approaching you. And I like to think that if you're doing everything right as a music artist, that will happen. At the same time, sometimes you as the artist feel like, again, you're getting closer to that tipping point, and the kind of iron is getting hotter, and so you can strike, at which point it sometimes makes sense to also approach or try to kind of meet with managers. So both can happen. Both are valid, but I do think that artists that are kind of doing the right thing and are using the right principles will naturally be attracting industry, and managers are, you know, very, very often the first people to kind of come on board, because I think managers are, you know, probably the only people in the industry that are willing to put their neck on the line for an artist before that full proof of concept is there. You know, they kind of are crazy that way. That's why they're managers. So, you know, I think if you're having any sort of discussions with a manager, what's really important is that their vision for the project, not necessarily the steps in which to do it, but their vision for the project is fully aligned with your artist vision. So however it is that you're seeing the project, what's important to you in terms of your musical values as an artist, does the manager really understand that and is on board with that vision? That doesn't mean they might not have suggestions and ways in which you can strengthen it or improve it. And, you know, it's always worth taking those on board from somebody that's experienced and can see it from the outside, which is sometimes easier than the artist because they're very close to it. But if you're on the same page in terms of the vision, that is absolutely the number one most important thing. Second most important thing is literally, you know, do I think I could have a good working relationship with this person? Do we gel? You don't by any stretch need to be best friends, but you do need to think that you're able to communicate well together. A manager and an artist are an ally. They're literally on the same team, and they should be a united front as they move forward through the industry, and they will come up against challenges and obstacles. And I think you're kind of looking for somebody that you feel is going to be a really good partner in that, basically. In terms of red flags, I mean, I don't know if there are specific red flags to look for. That's not something I would kind of necessarily even think about. It's just literally, do we see this project going the same way? Can this person add value to the project? Do I enjoy and feel kind of safe and secure and trust working with them? I think that really is it, because anything else can be sort of ironed out, essentially. Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot for sharing that, as well as obviously being the first manager on the podcast. We've never had the opportunity to talk about this. So, yeah, and I think it is great, because even with like talking to Lydia from PR, it's like the people you want in your tribe, so to speak, are the people you're going to love enjoying each other's company, because you're going to be spending so much time together, and especially the manager. Yeah,
and you're all sort of fighting for the same cause, if you know what I mean. You've got that shared goal and that shared kind of passion for what you're doing. Certainly, as a manager, once I'm managing an artist and I'm looking to put other team members in place, I'm thinking quite carefully about not just, do we trust this person? Do we like working with this person? Are they the best person for the job? I'm thinking about the kind of culture that me and the artist have created, and the kind of, you know, the feel of the project. Does this person fit? Are they a good cultural fit? You know, same as it would be if you were hiring for a company. Are they a good cultural fit for this artist? As a manager, you know your artist very well, and you know what they respond well to and what they perhaps don't respond so well to. So you're looking for people that kind of bring out the best in them and maybe challenge them in the right ways.
Awesome. So the virtual manager, what an interesting platform, to say the least. You regularly have contact with all the people in your community.
Yes, every day. Yeah.
Do you see any particular issues or anything that always comes up with emerging talent, with the freshest talent and artists in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. I think kind of some of the big ones, and you and I have talked about this, you know, prior to the podcast. I think one of the big ones is artists, especially when they're just starting out, they simply can't see or work out what the steps are to creating the music and art you love, to being able to monetize that again in a way that feels authentic and right for that artist. Because again, there's lots of different income streams. Different income streams are applicable to different artists and different types of music. So it's not all the same. But I think artists really struggle to understand how you make that jump from one thing to the next. I think early stages artists really struggle with knowing who to trust in the industry, just in terms of where they're getting their information. You know, there is an awful lot of stuff out there on the internet. Some of it is great marketing, but not great advice. If you sort of feel like you're out with the industry, or you're on the fringes of the industry, how do you know the difference between, you know, a legitimate and very experienced kind of promotional company versus one that's not? Just to give a kind of random example. So those, you know, making money, kind of who to trust and which people are the right people to work with for them. A massive, massive one that applies to absolutely all artists at all stages. But I think, again, is where early stages or independent artists need a lot of support is kind of just well-being, like literally sort of moral support, emotional support, mental health support, because I think the journey of being an artist is very isolating. It can be often very overwhelming. I think lots of artists kind of feel like they're on their own, especially if they're not living in a big city where there's a big music scene. And again, that's another reason why the virtual manager exists, is I felt more than anything that network of like-minded artists that are in a similar place or maybe a couple steps ahead of you in your career is so useful to be part of. With the virtual manager, my observation so far is I think people come for the information and the knowledge, and I genuinely think they stay for the community, especially those that, as I say, are not necessarily living in places where there's a really thriving music scene.
Yeah.
You still need access to other artists, other musicians, other producers, people that understand your journey and what it feels like, and they all help each other as much as I help them. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of challenges. I feel like I could list them for a long time. There's lots of challenges to being a music artist, and you know that saying, it's like new levels, new devils. You know, every time your career moves forward, there's other challenges that you come up against that maybe you don't know about. But I think it's a lot of it just day to day is kind of the simple questions of like, should I be releasing my music this way or this way? Should I be going with this distributor or that? Should I be looking at doing this? Or, you know, so a lot of my time just kind of during the day, this sort of day-to-day support is literally answering those questions, because what I don't want is I don't want artists to come up against a dead end and then just stay stuck because there's nobody there to simply go, here you go, this is how you sort of navigate that. And that's what I kind of do every day in the community. And that's on top of all, obviously, the training and courses and stuff we have.
Awesome. So I think it's a perfect time. How can they check out Virtual Manager, and what is the Virtual Management podcast?
Yeah. So basically, the Virtual Manager membership site is literally that. It's an online membership where you join, you have a login, and once you log in, you get access to the community, all of the music industry courses. I have music industry personnel and experts come in and give, you know, talks and interviews, so it's not just all me. Every month we do A&R on your music if you're needing feedback about works in progress and demos that you're working on. Every single week I do a live Q&A in there, and again, that just means they've got access to artist management guidance and being able to have their questions answered. And it works the same way a gym membership does. You know, you can leave or stay as long as you want. There's no kind of tie-in. It's a monthly fee, and you know, it also doesn't matter how much time you have to give to it or not, because there'll be some months when some members need to use it very, very heavily, perhaps because they've got a single coming out or something, and other months where they don't touch it at all. But I like to think that over the time that you are a member, you more than get, you know, the value of that back, essentially. So if people want to check that out, you can go and join the waiting list at www.thevirtualmanager.co.uk. As an extension of that, I have a podcast. So every single week, I put out what is kind of one music industry lesson for music artists, and the podcasts are really bite-sized. I try to keep them to about 10 minutes, and it's very straight to the point. Just this week, this is how you do this thing, and they can go away and action it, because my vision for the Virtual Manager, both the podcast and the membership, is that I don't want people to get just kind of addicted to consuming the information. I want to give them something that they can go and action that day or that week, you know, depending on where they are in their career. And I think that's what they're both great for, is you can dip in any time and immediately find the thing you need to know. Like, okay, how do I submit my song to Spotify? And you go into the Virtual Manager and there's immediately lesson there. You spend 30 minutes doing it, and that's it. And I want it to be that on a daily basis. I try to make it as usable as is possible, because you know, being a music artist, there's so many different things to think about, so many different hats to wear. I don't want people to just kind of come in and, as I say, I don't want to come and consume information that's not necessarily going to be helpful to them. If they want to use it that way, they can, but I think I want to see people taking action, even if it's just one small step a day or a week. That in itself is much better than sort of thinking about it or procrastinating. And I want to keep people motivated, because there's quite a lot of knockbacks that you might take as a music artist. It's not necessarily that easy to stay motivated. So again, it's kind of built with that in mind, very much so.
And you've just by saying that, you've reminded me of a post you must have posted like 6 months ago of like, always make sure let me try and think how you worded it. It was to do with like your energy, and always protect your energy, because there's going to be bumps in the road, and always that's what you want to preserve and look after. I can't remember exactly how you said it.
Okay. I don't know the particular post you're referring to, but they'll all be there somewhere on my Instagram.
I'll put it in the show notes, because I remember reading that and I was like, yeah, spot on.
I just, being a music artist, it's absolutely not easy. And I'm really, very unpopular sometimes for saying that when it comes to kind of like music conferences, and I'm like, here's the reality of it. But I think if you really want it, it's going to be worth it. But again, that's why I think one of the foundations of a successful kind of music career is having that really strong vision, because the times when you do get the knockbacks or deals fall through or relationships sour in this industry, I think remembering kind of why you're doing it, why it's important to you, what it's for. And I think the other thing to remember is like the journey of being an artist is literally that. It's a journey. It's not about, we're going to get to the end goal, we're going to get to the next thing. No, you need to like enjoy the experience every day, both the highs and the lows. And the highs are things like getting on stage and playing a great gig, or, releasing a single and getting a great sync off it or something. But the lows are kind of just as common, if not more, and you've got to be able to get through both.
And I think it's interest on that point, because there's not much middle ground.
There's not.
In the highs or in the lows.
No, there's not. And I think that's, it's part of the reason artist well-being is so important and so crucial to look after yourself, because it is an industry that I think is, as you say, it's not very measured. It's also not linear. It's very, very up and down. And things, you can have a kind of great week and a terrible week all in the same week. And as an artist manager, that's my biggest challenge, is actually, how do you stay on that emotional roller coaster without letting it kind of affect you too much? Because, I can close a really amazing deal on a Monday and then on Tuesday have something absolutely horrendous happen. And it's just part of it, it just is. And I think with being an artist, it's the same, but that is so much tougher if you're on your own. That kind of brings me full circle to say that's why I set the Virtual Manager up, because I think if you're an independent artist, you don't have a team yet, you don't have a manager, you might not necessarily have very many musician friends or members of family that really understand the journey. It's really difficult to explain to people the ups and downs of being an artist unless you are one. So I think that support is just so important.
So because we are coming to the end of the podcast, I'd like to ask, have you got any tips on that well-being side of things that work or have worked in the past with artists that you've managed or part managed, would you say, semi-managed with the Virtual Manager?
Yeah, I mean, as an artist manager, there's kind of lots of things. First of all, self-care is hugely important, and that looks different for every artist because, we all respond differently to different things. But I think if an artist can have some form of self-care routine that works for them, and that's, that's quite a personal thing, then it's really important to try and keep that consistent. That's really easy to say when things are going fine and it's not too stressful, but I think kind of remembering your self-care routines, whatever those are for you, is absolutely kind of number one. As an artist manager, when I'm managing artists, a big thing is kind of setting and managing expectations. Quite often when I see artists perhaps going through a difficult time or a challenging time, the difficulty is actually not what has potentially happened. It's that their expectation of what was going to happen was so different. And sometimes they view things that are, really, really not failures, and sometimes not even negatives, as very, very negative because they had a sort of incorrect expectation of what it was going to be in the first place. Yeah. So as a manager, I spend a lot of time being very honest and upfront with my artists about, this is what's about to happen. This is kind of what you'll experience. These are the outcomes we're looking for. And if we don't get those outcomes, this is what kind of plan B would be, so that they feel like they've got an understanding of what's ahead and how to handle it if perhaps it doesn't necessarily go to plan. But I think a lot of artists are measuring themselves or measuring their progress against something that's very untrue or unrealistic. And so then they feel like they've failed or got something wrong. And I'm like, no, you haven't failed at all. You just were expecting something different from what is actually the reality. And it's just because they don't know, they don't know the industry. They've not experienced it before. So that's a really big part of what I do as a manager. And I think that's quite important. I think things like wellbeing and mental health become a lot tougher challenges when you're touring and you're doing that heavily. So, that's when I, as a manager, would look to try and bring in more support for the artist in whatever form that might need to take for them as much as possible. Not overworking artists. That's a really difficult balance to keep if things go well, because sometimes an artist's trajectory can be unexpectedly quick. That's rare, but it happens. And when it does, I think it's not just the artist that has to make some big adjustments. The whole team are suddenly, you're being reactive instead of proactive all of a sudden. So there's lots and lots of things. But for artists personally, just making sure that you've got a really solid self-care routine. And if you do find that you're needing extra support, making sure that you're reaching out to it. There's thankfully lots of organizations now for musicians support and help that literally didn't exist, until quite recently. So I'm really glad to see that happening.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like Help Musicians UK alone are wonderful. There's Music for Mental Wealth. There's even Mind. There's so many out there now. So it's great to see the culture changing and also more information being out on that. Absolutely.
And I try to make music artists aware that those exist and regularly sort of share the numbers and details for those, because it's just really important the musicians know they're never on their own, essentially.
Awesome. So I'm afraid we are coming to an end to the podcast, but we always end with this particular question, as it could sometimes end in like a 10-minute answer, depending how deep you want to get.
Okay.
But could be on a local, national or international scale to the music industry. But what would you like to see change?
In the music industry?
In the music industry.
There is more than one thing.
Okay, well...
I think the main thing that I would like to see, and actually I think it's different in different genres and different sectors of the music industry. I'm quite lucky as a manager to have worked across electronic music, pop music, soul, R&B, like lots of different genres. And they actually do have their own kind of culture and feel. They're not all necessarily the same. More broadly speaking, I'd like to see more equality. First of all, we still have a very male-dominated industry. We still don't necessarily have people of colour being represented as well as they should be. I'd like to see some of that kind of democratised, and I think it's happening, but I think a lot of it is talking rather than doing.
Yeah.
And I include myself in that, in terms of sometimes it's hard to know what is the best thing to do. I am seeing people start to, people like myself speak out about it a bit more and be honest about their experiences. This is going to sound really kind of perhaps a bit simplified, but I'd like to see the industry becoming a bit more kind, because especially when it comes to artists, you are literally managing humans and human relationships, and those are not necessarily simple. They're quite complex. And I think there sometimes is a very competitive culture in parts of the industry that don't really serve anybody, actually, because we're all in it together, regardless of what stage of your career you're at or how well or not it may be going. We're all in it together. Everybody's got the same shared goal, which is simply that they want to get great music out into the world and entertain people or move people. And the rest of us are just facilitating it. It's not, it genuinely isn't life or death from a commercial perspective. What is life or death is human and artists' well-being, and I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that prioritized.
Special, and I totally agree with that. As so many stories now in the past few years of different artists who have suffered, not even just music industry related as well. It's the whole entertainment industry, and
absolutely, media. I think it's all quite challenging. And the other thing to say is, we're starting to see support for artists becoming more common or more prominent. I'd like to see the same for everybody in the industry, because everyone, not to complain about my own role, but something people forget about artist managers specifically, and I can only speak from the experience of an artist manager, is every kind of knockback or whatever that an artist might get, it comes to the manager first. And managers really do feel very passionately about their artists and about their projects. They wouldn't be doing it otherwise. It's difficult when you're currently, you're constantly kind of getting no's or things not working out the way they should. But what you do as an artist manager is you absorb that, you take it on board, and then you kind of sugarcoat it, for want of a better word, to your artist to make sure that they are sort of very much in the know, but also kind of protected from some of the sharper end of it. But if you are at the sharp end of it as a manager, or, there's other roles in the industry that also take that, that is challenging. That really is challenging. And it hurts me sometimes just as much as it will hurt the artist to get a no on something that you were really hoping was going to work out. So it would be good to see a bit more support for people within the industry, especially those that are working independent and freelance, because they don't have necessarily a sounding board or an HR department or anything like that. So just in general. Yeah,
I've never thought about the beyond the artist, really, because it is true. Everyone... You think of an artist, you do think of that individual or that group, but you don't really think about the team as much. So that saying opened my eyes. I
once was managing an artist who later we parted ways, and then she shared with me, we stayed friends, and she shared with me a few months later, she was like, oh, we've been getting some really unkind, kind of nasty emails from the rest of the industry. And I was like, oh no, you've always got those all day, every day. It's just that it was always me that dealt with them and I didn't necessarily forward them on. You know, like that's par for the course a lot of the time. And it doesn't need to be. It really doesn't. And I think everyone needs to be a bit more mindful about, you know, we're dealing with humans who are working in the same amazing industry. You know, we are literally, as I say, it's music. It's not life or death.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being part of the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Your podcast, to the virtual manager, all in the show notes. But yeah, thanks for sitting down with me today.
Not at all. Thank you.
And then enjoy your train back home.
Yes, I will do. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.